Uh, Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our third Young Professionals webinar. It's really good to see you all. My name is Kolofelo, and I am a member of the Young Professionals community here at SAPIX. Before I introduce our guest speaker for today, I would like to gently remind you about a couple of events that we'll be hosting. The first is the Coffee Chat mentorship event on the 22nd of June, which I will briefly touch upon before the end of this webinar, as well as another webinar on the 7th of July. So if you guys haven't yet registered for these events, I would encourage you guys to do so. Before I introduce our speaker for today, please make sure that your microphone is muted so we can avoid interruptions. And please feel free to type any questions that you might have for our guest in the group chat. Okay, with that being said, our guest for today is Mr. Grant Swanepoel. Just a little bit of background. Grant is a supply chain consultant who has worked in the supply chain industry for 15 years. And in this time, he has built credibility in areas such as sales and operations, demand planning, and supply chain improvement. Grant has added real value to the organizations he has worked with, contributing to a diverse range of supply chain improvement projects. In addition, he is experienced in running his own supply chain consulting company, as well as working on projects with industry-leading consulting organization, CHAINovation, mainly focused on SCOR-based transformation, learning programs, and industry leadership and industry thought leadership projects. He has a high degree of international experience and exposure to challenging and volatile business environments, high growth and declining markets, as well as experience in working with people from different cultural groups. Grant backs up his practical skills with an educational background to match, as he graduated top of his master's class in supply chain management at the University of Johannesburg. He's also SCOR certified and also holds qualifications such as a master's in supply chain management, a BCom in marketing management, as well as an honors in logistics from both from the University of Johannesburg. Without any further delays, I'll be handing it over now to Grant. Thank you very much, Grant, for making the time, and over to you.
Kolofelo, thank you so much for that introduction. Really do appreciate it. So actually, I don't need to go through this first slide here. That was a fantastic introduction. So thank you. That's really great. It's actually kind of a normal question that comes up when you go to a braai in Johannesburg. It's like, oh, hey, how's it? So what do you do? Right? And I think you've just answered the question for me. So thank you so much. So my details are on this slide, and these slides will be distributed after the call. So you can contact me at any time if you'd like, or have any additional questions afterwards as well. Let me tell you a little bit before we get into the detail about CHAINovation Africa. And it's really the key areas that CHAINovation focuses on is transforming supply chain performance. It's a coaching-centric approach, which means that we do go into an organization and try to leave them with something that they can use after we leave, right? So that, let me just make sure you can hear me. Yes, perfect. So we try and leave them with something that they can use after the engagement is over, right? So it's not just about doing a project and leaving, it's really about adding that lasting value. CHAINovation Africa is a member of the DBI network, which is a global membership of different consulting businesses with different skills and abilities, which sometimes do collaborate to do projects. It is a SAPIX authorized education partner and also an authorized consulting partner of ASCM, the Association of Supply Chain Management. And just to go into some of the offerings, so typical offerings of the company is SCOR training, customized supply chain skills and training to organizations, optimizing supply chains and companies through methodology or general PRIOP, which is otherwise known as, through planning processes, people and technology alignment, and also ASCM enterprise training and evaluation, which is really a sustainability side of supply chain. And we're actually going to touch a little bit on sustainability in this presentation today as well. Just from an approach point of view, so not to go into too much of this detail here, but typically we try to follow a very logical approach. So looking at supply chains from a segmentation point of view and actually building it up into the different areas as we go. So segmenting and looking at what we're working with, doing gap analysis to understand where the gaps are, trying to fix the gaps, and then trying to really optimize the business into the future as well. So let's get started, and I'd like to know a little bit more about you now. So firstly, if you could just go into either your browser on your phone or in your on your computer. The address is polev.com/dkent011 at the top over there on the screen. So if you can see that, I'd just like you to go into that if you can for me. And then you'll be able to click on here on this map anywhere that you are calling in from today. If you're not calling from South Africa and you're not in this map, maybe just put your little pointer at the bottom right-hand corner in the sea there on the ocean somewhere, somewhere in the Indian Ocean, right? So if you could just go into that for me, I'm going to go in myself. Okay, I'll take a moment. There is an area to put your name in. You don't have to put your name in there though. Okay, all right. Okay, let's see if we can start to get some responses here. There we go. Get some Gauteng. Lesotho. Of course, Cape Town. Wish I was there. Looks like probably Bloemfontein. Oh, no, that one's gone. Okay. Okay, we're starting to get some. We should get quite a few of these. Let's just give everyone a few minutes. Okay, good. I don't see anyone representing Durban at this point. Is that because the weather's good over there? I know the map may be a bit small, so you can actually zoom in on the map if you need to. Okay. All right. Okay, great. So we're starting to get some responses there. So who's not calling in from South Africa? Who is that? The one on the bottom right over there. Maybe you can put your location in the chat. Okay. All right, we've got some Limpopo here as well. That's great. All right, fantastic. Okay, good to meet everyone. I'm glad that everyone's there. Ah, I've got a Saudi Arabia. That's fantastic. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you. All right, so let's move on so we don't waste too much time. Okay, so now the next thing to get to know you is I'd like to know a little bit about your experience in the supply chain industry, right? So I know that this is a young professional and student webinar, but there may be people from all over the place in this, right? So if you're a student and you just focus on studying at the moment, you can just put your, select that one and say, I'm a student. Or are you a newbie with less than 2 years experience, an upcoming professional between 2 and 5 years, or you could be a seasoned professional with more than 5 years experience, okay? Or are you just retired at this point? So let's have a look what we're dealing with here today. I would expect probably more students and newbies, but let's see how this goes. Okay. Okay, great. All right, so we're getting a lot of experience, or some sort of less than 2 years of experience, the majority. Okay. Okay, fantastic. Okay, I'm going to move on. All right, so thank you for that. So let's just go through some of the key topics that we will cover today. So first of all, what does end-to-end supply chain mean? Okay, let's define that a little bit, and let's make sure we're all on the same level in terms of understanding the meaning of what is end-to-end supply chain, and then go on to the planning element too. So look at planning versus execution, understanding the information flows and planning interfaces. So how does planning link into execution, and how does that link into the information that's required across different elements within a supply chain? Then we'll discuss some planning KPIs, measuring both the past and the future. And you may say, how can we measure the future? Well, we can anticipate what we think is going to happen in the future and ensure that we do the right things to mitigate any potential risks that we may come across. Then number 5 is the relationships and enablement piece. So a very important topic when we talk about end-to-end is how the relationships are built between the different areas, both within a supply chain and between the different functions. And then end-to-end sustainability as well. Sustainability inherently has an end-to-end nature to it. So that's something we'll discuss a little bit as well. We'll then combine and recap what we've learned and take any additional questions that you may have. If there are any questions in the meantime, please do feel free to ask in the chat. More than happy to take the questions as we go. Maybe Kulafelo, if you could help with that, if there are any questions that come up there, just interrupt me and we can address those immediately. Okay. All right, so let's start with the question. What does end-to-end supply chain planning mean to you? 011. And you can just put a few comments in there. So it's just a sort of just a phrase or a word or two that you can actually add in there. Let's see what the understanding is of end-to-end supply chain planning. Should start to receive some responses any minute now, I'm sure. So it's planning from manufacturing to the end customer and reverse logistics. Okay, great. So everything from planning, manufacturing, and customer, including the returns leg as well. Demand, manufacturing, supply, distribution, end user as well. Great. Looking at it like kind of a total view of the supply chain. Let's wait for 1 or 2 more. So planning is done to be able to get the right product to the right customers at the right time, place, price, and right quality. Definitely part of the drivers for end-to-end planning for sure. Okay, let's see what else we've got. So the planning of procurement from supplier to customer. Okay, great. So a lot of these comments so far have got kind of the supply side and the customer side inherently in here. Okay, we'll do one more. Okay, so it involves everything from product design, procurement of raw materials, to delivery of the final product and the after-sale customer service. Yes, exactly. Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. So definitely, I think we're getting kind of an overview of the end-to-end nature of this, right? So it definitely involves an integrated entire process. And exactly what was mentioned before, it's the product design and procurement of the raw materials, the scheduling of any of the production, any of the transportation, and then the final delivery to the finished product to the customer. And also the extension to that after-sales service and reverse logistics piece as well, right? What's the difference between end-to-end and traditional supply chain management? Well, the traditional supply chain would optimize each function separately, and end-to-end optimizes the total supply chain across multiple functions and organizations. In my mind, actually, if I really think of end-to-end, I just think of it as supply chain management, to be very honest. The traditional approach, I would say, is completely outdated. At this point in time, I think in general, people are thinking of supply chains from an end-to-end perspective anyway. And also all of the actions that are taken usually to improve involve more than one function, right? And the trade-offs between the different functions. So definitely that's the case. Some of the drivers that exist to why we want to optimize end-to-end supply chain management is we want to make sure there is a seamless flow of activities across the entire supply chain. And that doesn't just mean the product, right? It also talks to the cost. It also talks to the flow of money. It talks to the flow of information as well. So any of those flows within the supply chain, we want to create as little barriers as possible. We want to also reduce delays and the ability to detect issues in the supply chain, so wherever those issues may exist. Improve the relationships, provide visibility as well, so we can also reduce the risk and the cost, and also predict and try and plan what's going to happen in the market, right? It's too late once it's happened. We need to be able to anticipate and to plan for it. The transparency is very important as well, so be able to see what's going on and actually detect any blind spots within that entire chain, and also really reduce the labor and material cost. We want to reduce and remove waste in the process. So some key drivers that I've mentioned down below there is things like quality, right? Quality of the product, the cost, you want to keep the cost down, working capital, which would incorporate your inventory, the sustainable aspect of supply chains, the agility. So for me, this is a very key one. Agility is something that we've seen a lot more prominently in recent times due to the consistently changing nature of the market and of the environment in which we operate. Being able to be agile is becoming very important, right? But that needs the visibility, as we've spoken about in this whole process. And obviously, service level is very important as well. For the students in the room, of course, you know that the two main goals of supply chain management is to reduce cost and increase service level, right? So those are always going to be the case. And I've just put it in here just for visibility is the SCOR model. You may not have come across this before, but the SCOR model is a great model and framework which actually really very well demonstrates what it looks like to be end-to-end, right? Taking into account the 5 key process areas: plan, source, make, deliver, return, and also enable within your specific organization, but also within the supplier and the suppliers, and also on the customer side, outwards towards the end consumer. Okay, all of those are underpinned by the planning function. Okay, so planning across all these different areas is obviously the key part here. So which of the following supply chain process areas do you think typically have the longest lead time? Okay, and I'll explain to you why this is important. So if we think of the different areas here below, first of all, processing of raw materials. So that would be like the creation of raw materials. Let's say it's the packaging goods or the packaging material and things like that. The supply of raw materials and packaging, so the transportation aspect of that, right? Especially if it's imported, let's say. The manufacturing of finished goods, so the actual manufacturing process of producing goods, or the delivery of finished goods to customers. Which of those do you believe has the longest lead time? So let's say you receive an order right now. What is going to take the longest for you to actually execute, right? Those are the kind of questions you want to answer here. So which of those do you think is the most, takes the longest? Okay, let's give it a few moments, some more people to respond. Okay, we should get quite a lot of responses because we have 50 people in the call, so. Okay, so far I really like what I'm seeing here because there is actually a right answer, I think, most of the time, in most supply chains. And yes, so definitely from a supply of raw materials and packaging, extremely long lead times, right? Typically, your manufacturing time is going to be very short. So let's assume you have all the materials you need to produce something. You could typically switch that on within a week or two, right? It's pretty easy to do that, assuming that you have the right materials, the right labor, the right resources to do that. But if you don't have a raw material or you don't have the packaging and you need to place an order, I mean, that lead time can be 3 months, right? Easily be 3 months or longer. So that's really one of the areas that typically a supply chain would like to focus on to enable us to be as agile as possible, and also to give the signal back into the supply chain to ensure that we have enough of those raw materials and packaging products, right? So that's really a key important aspect. Okay, so let me move on to, okay, so this is going to look like quite a detailed and maybe slightly messy diagram, but work with me here and I'll take you through this, right? So we're talking specifically here about a make to stock business. Okay, so make to stock means that we are not building or planning based on an order that we've already received. we are planning the supply chain based on anticipation of a potential order that we could receive in the future, right? So we're making to stock it, we're making it to keep it with the expectation that someone is going to come along and buy the product. That's what we're talking about here specifically. This could be slightly different if we look to a make-to-order organization, but of course, generally principles are going to be very similar. Okay, so let's work our way from the right-hand side. So what is the first thing that we need to be aware of? Okay, the first thing is our go-to-market or GTM plan. So how and where will we sell? Okay, what products are we going to sell and where are we going to sell them? So what channels, what retailers, if we're in the retail business, if we're an online business, how does it get to the customer or the end consumer? What are the things we need to consider there as well? Well, we need to think about things like, what do we think our competitors will do? What promotional activity are we planning in the future to execute? What are some of the activities and what are the trends that we could see going into the future as well? PLCM is product life cycle management. Okay, so the product from launching a product all the way to when we actually want to discontinue that item. NPD, new product development, right? So any new products that we're going to add onto our portfolio as well. And then just portfolio. So what is it that we want to keep in our portfolio, right? Those are key important things as a starting point, right? And you'll see on the left-hand side there, we got planning M+12/18. Okay, so that's just very simply month plus 12 or month plus 18. So 12 to 18 months in the future is what we want to look at this for. That's the nature of planning. If you see below, the execution one is M+0 or M+1. So within the current month or maybe 1 month ahead of time is how we would look at the execution activities in general. Okay, so some of the key components here. So now when we're thinking of the go-to-market plan, the first thing we need to do is think of how do we support that with the right inventory. We saw a comment earlier that said, someone said, let's have the right inventory at the right time. Definitely talks to this, right? So in this example, this could be a distributor, and this could be where the finished goods lie for that distributor. So what do we need to do to ensure that that distributor or that retailer even has the right products to sell? Okay, so we're going to do a sales plan. So the sales plan or demand forecast, there's lots of things that people do call it, is what we will sell. Okay, so how many units are we going to sell in the future in the next 12 months? What would the revenue be that we anticipate to get from that? What is the volume, right? The volume is important to know when we think of deliveries and how many trucks we need, how we're going to anticipate that requirement. The profit that we could make from it, right? This definitely is something, and I work in a couple of projects where we need to build in that profit element, right? The visibility of, okay, so our future plan is going to show us that we can sell a certain number. That's a really key part there. The transportation support that sales plan. Okay, so that's the first thing we need to think about. Then we need to think about, okay, now we're in our own business, is how much inventory in finished goods form do we need to support that? Okay, in order to have enough inventory, we need to produce stock. Okay, so that's our production plan, also looking ahead 12 to 18 months. So this is what we will manufacture. This is not yet a confirmed schedule or production schedule, but this is a future anticipation of what we will be scheduling into the future. What's a really key thing there to make sure we know is what are potential capacity constraints that may be existing at this point? Also, what are the lead times? You know, how long will it take us to do this? That's a really key thing there to support the inventory that we need to support the sales plan. Okay, then let's move back even further down the chain. Okay, so now that we have a production plan, we need to have raw materials, we need to have packaging materials, we need to have MRO, which is maintenance, repair, and operations materials as well, to support that production. Okay, so that's also a plan that we need to think about and have inventory available to support that. Then we go all the way back to the end of the chain, saying now we need to know what our supply plan is. Okay, So this is what we will procure. What is the material availability of what we anticipate we're going to need in the future months? What is the cost of goods? So COGS, cost of goods sold, the lead times of that, and then the bill of material, the BOM, materials breakdown, and try to optimize that piece as well. Okay, so you can already see that there's a link directly from what we anticipate to do on the go-to-market side and the sales plan, all the way back into the supply plan. Okay, and this is where you can see that link being very clear. One thing just to mention also is the word policy here. So when we say policy, we're talking specifically about what our inventory level should be. So in the planning phase, we're setting the policy. Okay, how much stock do we want to keep? Do we want to keep 30 days worth of stock? Do we want to keep 10 days worth of stock? And those things all relate to how accurate we are on the forecast, how long we're going to wait for lead times, what our order levels are going to be, and all of those kind of factors. Okay, but you can definitely see, I think, the importance of how planning and an overlay really impacts so much of what will be done in real life when we actually get to the execution phase. Okay, and just to mention too, I think that the one thing here is, you know, when we think of the future production requirements and supply planning, there's also a make versus buy decision that can happen. This isn't something that changes that frequently, but you may do a trade-off analysis and say, what is the cost of us getting that product from a supplier fully made, or us actually manufacturing that in-house ourselves? And some companies have a hybrid approach where they're making some products themselves and they're also importing or getting some finished goods already from some suppliers. Okay, I know this is a lot, so let me quickly check if there's any questions or points of clarity that anyone wants to understand. Feel free to also talk if you want. You don't have to just chat in the chat. Hi, I think there was a question there. Okay. Any questions at all so far? Okay, yay. Did something, I think. That was okay. Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself, absolutely. Talk away, talk away. Okay.
You're obviously doing too good a job explaining it all. No one's got questions.
Or they just don't understand it.
But we are here and we are listening.
Okay, fantastic. All right, let me move on a bit. So, okay, so just from an execution point of view, and not to delve into too much of the detail here, because we're talking about planning specifically here, but there's certain functions that are execution functions, which kind of happen once you received an order from a supplier and you actually are making small short-term decisions to get those things done. Okay. All right, so let me move on. And I'm not going to go through too much of the detail here because I don't want to waste time and run out of time. Okay. So the first thing that I think is really important to understand coming out of this is, let's look at KPIs now. Okay, key performance indicators. So we have backward-looking KPIs, and this is this first line over here. You can see this arrow is pointing backwards, right? These are things that we're measuring, looking back at history. Okay, so things like, what was the cost of goods actually achieved versus expected? What was our order fulfillment like from the supplier side versus expected? How much inventory do we have right now from a raw material and packaging material point of view? Looking more towards the customer side, then what does the perfect order fulfillment on the customer side look like? You know, how are we enabling and how are we actually delivering our product to them? Forecast accuracy as well. These things are all historic, right? So we can look at the previous month, you can look at the previous year, all things that we've already done. Okay, so key questions that you may ask yourself from these things that we've already done is, okay, so why is that specific supplier consistently not delivering on time? Okay, or why do we have so much excess stock? I hear this all the time. So the problem is that we already have the excess stock. So, you know, we can't deny it right now. It's in our warehouse. So that's really some of the key questions you'd ask from this. Why is our forecast accuracy so poor? Why didn't we send our customer the goods at the expected service level? And why does our customer not like us, right? So CSI, just for information, is, normally represents customer satisfaction index, right? Or consumer satisfaction index could be as well. So these things are very important, right? And RCCA represents root cause, corrective action. Just knowing our status currently and then understanding why that is would be the root cause. But do we also implement the corrective action to get it right in the future across this whole supply chain? Okay, that's really the key to actually fixing the problems. Okay, so this is all historic looking, and a lot of companies do this very well, right? They have dashboard upon dashboard that gives them historic looking view of what their KPIs are. But then let's also look at this going forward. Okay, so you saw on the previous slide that we looked at how do we anticipate what the future would look like? So there are things like material constraints that we could have in the future, right? What is our anticipated cover in terms of inventory that we would have, let's say August, September, October, November? What is that inventory level that we expect to have? What are the production constraints? And then what are our potential lost sales as well? So if we already know at this point that we're going to struggle to get one of the raw materials, or we have a risk from a constraint in the capacity point of view, we already know there's a potential to actually lose some sales. Okay, so the key question here is, okay, so we know that these things could happen. What are we going to do about it to prevent it from happening? And that's where, okay, so that's really, really key to understand. Then how can we optimize where we get materials from? Okay, that's a key question, right? Based on lead times, batch sizes, cost, and quality, how could we mitigate any material constraints that we may have in the future? So often you can anticipate a certain shortage of things. So, you know, we could have a shortage of a tin or a shortage of some kind of commodity. Those things we can usually anticipate and understand, okay, what will we do differently to, what do we need to do in the future to ensure capacity availability? And also a very important one, if you look on the way on the right-hand side here, is let's say we anticipate some potential lost sales. Okay, let's say, for example, our business is 100 million Rand business. We're expecting that we could lose 2 million Rand in the next 2 months, or the next, let's make it a longer period of time, the next 4 months. Okay. Now we know this, and we know that there maybe is a constraint that is going to be difficult to fix. We can look at how to adjust our demand and how to shape that demand to maybe sell other products that we have already. Perhaps look at different discount structures, look at things that we can do differently there to ensure that we still make our budget, but maybe in a slightly different way given the constraints. Okay, so that's really important. I see I had a question here about the CSI, correct. Corporate social responsibility is also, the CSI can also represent that for sure. In this case, we're speaking about the customer satisfaction. And then I see another question here, what proposed solutions do you have to minimize stock aging and redundant inventory? Okay, so excellent question from Unati. To minimize it in the future, we need to know and anticipate its potential increase. Okay, so that's why looking at things like the finished goods days cover as an option here, finished goods days cover and finished goods inventory health, that can show us the aging of the product, the excess proportion of the product, and what potentially may be happening. That we can actually use to try and minimize that from happening. Another way in terms of solutions is, remember when we looked at the lead times, right? The lead time constraint is not in manufacturing. The lead time constraint is in the raw material and the packaging material, typically. So we can try to delay as much as possible the manufacturing or the conversion of that product into a finished good so that we minimize any potential for that stock aging and redundant inventory to actually occur. Okay. See another question here. How would you calculate the optimal buffer level to maintain an item with a lead time of 3 months? Obviously, we would not want to maintain a 3-month stock holding due to tied up capital. The first order would be a 3-month order, but the orders to follow would 1 month stock holding be an ideal solution? Okay, that calculation, I would say we definitely need more information for that calculation, because we also need to understand how frequently do we order. Also, what is the risk from a forecast point of view? If we believe we're very accurate, you can hold less stock, right? If we are not that accurate and we see that we have a high variability on our demand, we would potentially need to hold more. But ideal scenario is to hold as little as possible, of course, right? And also protect ourselves. It's always that balance. Okay. So let me move on a little bit to make sure we don't run out of time in this session. Okay. So just really quickly, and I'm not going to go into the details of this, but SCOR also provides a view of specific metrics that can be used, mainly from a historic point of view, but also these can be applied into the future, and look at where the potential risks could be in the future. Okay. All right. So I'm going to actually move on from this one because I don't want to waste too much time. So the next one that we're going to talk about here is the relationships and enablement to support the end-to-end supply chain planning. Okay. So again, in our make-to-stock organization, we need to think of certain things that would support our relationships and make them stronger. Okay, and that's really, let's first start on the customer side. So again, things like customer satisfaction index, receiving that feedback from the customer that tells us where we're going wrong. Okay, really valuable information for us to improve and to get better. Monthly S&OP inputs and engagement. For me, this one is actually a really key one, right? Engaging with that customer in your S&OP cycle to say, what do we believe that future demand could be? Okay, and I can give you a few examples of this where sometimes you have a customer that orders very infrequently, right? Maybe a specific product, they don't order it that often, that it's not a monthly process. You'd actually want to try and get as much information as possible, potentially through the commercial side or the sales side of the business, to try and anticipate when you think they will place that order and how much. That will help us a lot to manage the back of the supply chain, right? To ensure we have enough inventory at the time that we think it's needed, not before and hopefully not after. So those are really key inputs and important there. Also, what could be done here is the periodic inclusion of suppliers into customer meetings. Okay, so if we look at our suppliers in the business, to give them a sense of what the issues are on the customer side of the business, you could include them. There's nothing stopping you from doing that, right? So there can be a link or an interaction there as well. I wouldn't say it's all the time, but definitely periodically that could happen, right? To ensure that there's that end-to-end view. The 3PLs that we have in the business, so any of the service providers, the engagement of them with them as much as possible as well. Something I try to recommend is using an in-house person if you can, right? So that 3PL becomes very integrated into your own organization as well, and they can make decisions with you. Okay. Then on the supplier side, things like performance scorecards and the communication of that. You should not be only communicating with your supplier once a year, right? That needs to happen frequently. Hi supplier, this is the service level we have with you. This is the perfect order fulfillment levels. This is what's going wrong. Here's how we can fix it, or how can we fix it, right? Really important engagements there. And then monthly S&OP meetings, of course, as well. Because on the sourcing side, now that we know what the demand is, we can link that into a supply plan, as we mentioned earlier, and that supply plan can be looped back into the supplier to get the information from them to say, are they able to support us with the requirements for the future? Okay, so those are the important steps over there. And then one thing just to mention quickly is internal service level agreement robustness. So as we even talk through the outside of the business and say the customer and the supplier needs to be good from a relationship point of view, we also need to make sure that within the organization, the service levels between the different departments is also robust, right? And that improves the communication and the relationship there. It will also help linking that customer side information to the supplier side if we don't have any gaps internally. So typical technologies that could be used is things like enterprise resource planning or ERP, using statistical forecasting models to determine demand, performance dashboards. That's obviously really important too, and that can be automated through technology. And then really importantly, to tie it all together is the S&OP process, right? Which can tie all these steps together and the relationships as well as the technology. Okay. Okay, so let me move to not waste too much time here. Okay, great. All right, and then I'm going to, I think probably just on a note where this is important, and let me quickly take a question if there is. Okay. See a question here on an equilibrium scale. Is the customer score important, or is the supplier scorecard important? Okay, I would say that one impacts the other. So I like the question, right? So first, let's think of what we're trying to do. We're trying to satisfy the customer, okay? We want the entire chain to be customer driven, to enable us to get that product there at the right time, at the right cost, with all those factors. Sometimes what you'll find is on the supply side is, why are we not delivering effectively to our customer? Either it's an internal issue, it could be a process issue, it could be something in manufacturing, but it also could be, which is actually a lot of the time, is we didn't receive a material from the supplier, and now we cannot produce and we cannot support the customer, right? So that link has to be very clear. What things do the suppliers need to do to support the customer side of the scorecard, right? That's extremely important. Okay, I hope that gives a little more insight in that one. Okay, and then just to really briefly talk a little bit about the environmental and ethical side of, of end-to-end sustainability. So things like energy, water, and waste management. Okay, these things happen inside the business, material usage policies and audits. So what are the materials that we should be using? Is there stuff that is hazardous to the environment, right, that we need to consider and maybe not use as much of? Okay, climate strategy, product lifecycle stewardship, and circular economy. These three concepts are all concepts that are inherently end-to-end. When we think of circular economy, and there's people that can explain this much better than I can, and then actually make it almost their life work to do this work, right? But the circular economy is saying, how can we take waste from one supply chain and input that into another to make it to produce something else, right? How does that economy work all combined together? That's the very nature of end-to-end. Product lifecycle stewardship as well is the returns that we're getting back. Are we using those returns then effectively to produce something else, right? Typical examples could be like bottles that you receive. The bottles could be returned back to the supplier, and those bottles can be used to make something else, or to recycle the glass in the bottles. That's a key example there. Okay. Then the ethical side. Okay, and this is something that, we hear a lot about in South Africa, right? Usually that sits on the supply side. Okay, procurement, supplier, and source. So this is where the anti-corruption policy and recourse comes in. So the organization, when dealing with a supplier, should have in place a very robust either policy or a method of recourse should something go wrong, right? Or should there be some form of dishonest behavior, okay? Human rights and labor practices, policies, and audits, okay? Also linking into the supplier again. Having a supplier that uses child labor, we all know is not acceptable. But do we have the right intellectual property and patents? Obviously, we all want to make sure that whatever is done in the supply chain is not stealing somebody else's ideas. Responsible marketing and sales engagement, of course, is key as well. We know that this is important, and especially when it's very easy to make a mistake when you're marketing, right? And the consequences of that, obviously, there's a lot of consequences from a societal point of view if that does happen, even if you make a mistake in your organization. So you've got to be very careful about the way you market the products. And then confidentiality of information, okay? So a very important one, and we hear often about breaches in data, people's information being spewed around the internet. So those are key things as well. And this becomes even more important when we think of end-to-end supply chain management, because we are now delivering a huge amount of information between these different players. So you actually open yourself to even more risk of that being breached unless you have a solid safeguard in place to ensure that that does not happen. Okay. Let me quickly pause for a second and check if there are any questions based on this. Okay, not at this point, but feel free to either shout or put your questions in the box. Okay, so let's do a really quick recap. Okay, so this is actually all the stuff we've gone through today. I know it was a bit of a whirlwind, right? So first of all, planning activities from a longer term horizon and the strategic focus of that. The execution activities that we do that are operational and tactical. Root cause corrective action, which we support through the backward-looking KPIs. And then risk identification and mitigation, which we support through the forward-looking KPIs. How do we build relationships? Through visibility that can support the entire supply chain. And how do we enable that visibility and decision implementation through technology? Then also consideration must be given to environment. Okay, so supply chain-wide focus on these ecological issues and also the ethics. So the cross-functional visibility of the impact that we could have on society and also things like corruption and ethical issues within that as well. Okay, let's take a question. Okay, so Unati, you like to talk, yes. Grant, for consistency and ethical reasons, don't you think the auditor should be audited as well? I guess so, yes. So I suppose auditors can be unethical too, for sure. And then now, how long should the planning process take? If we look at sales and operations planning in particular, is typically a month-long process. So it's a monthly cycle that then takes into account the rolling 12 or 18 months, right? So usually within that cycle, there's different elements that happen. There's demand side planning, there's supply side planning, there's an executive level decision making and simulation that's required. But normally that horizon is looking forward about 12 to 18 months. Okay. And then how would you improve supply chain visibility from supplier visibility from suppliers and manufacturing? Okay, also a fantastic question, right? So the first step in that is we need to ensure that we provide them with the information first. Okay, so if we're the organization and we're doing the demand forecasting, we're looking at how much production we need, how much inventory we need to have. That monthly cycle can feed back into those suppliers. Say on workday 10 of every month, we provide them with a list, either electronically or even manually. Here's the list of all the future expectations of what we will need to order from you. Could you provide us back with some information in terms of when you can deliver, or if there are any risks that you foresee based on that, right? So that is one thing. There's also more automated ways to do it, like extension of the ERP system into the supply side, which becomes more automated and you can immediately see what is required, and even for the future. So it's beyond just what's been placed as an order, but actually provide that view of what could potentially be risks, right, in the supply side. Okay. All right, so I'm going to ask one more question for today, and then I think we can take a couple of questions, and I don't know, then Kulafelo, from your side, there's a few extra points just to go over. So I'd like you to go back into your PolEv, polev.com/dkent011. And now that you know all of these different themes, right, and we've gone through that, I'd like you to take a moment to just rank them, right? And rank the level of adoption for each of these in your organization that you currently work, or if you're a student still, think of an organization that you may be familiar with and think of which of these you think is the most mature and which is the least mature when you think of end-to-end supply chain. Okay, so you'll be able to see you can actually move across the different components within your poll everywhere. So take a moment to do that for me, and then let's see what we get in the results. While we're doing that, let me answer Lindiwe's question. So Lindiwe says, is there a reason why there is so much difference from government supply chain management and what we are taught and what is practiced in the private sector? is it maybe government SCM regulated? I feel there are so many limitations to an extent that quality is compromised. I'm not quite sure I understand your question, Lindy. Perhaps you want to ask the question, or maybe someone else can help me with that.
Hi, Grant. Could you please repeat the poll website so that I can vote?
Sure. It's at the top of the screen. It's pollev.com/DKent011. Can you see it?
All right, I can see it now. Thanks.
Okay, fantastic. All right, no problem. Lindy, if you'd like, we can definitely take your question offline, or if you'd like to ask now as well. I'm just not quite sure I understand your comment, sorry.
Hi, Grant. Hello.
Hi, is that Lindy?
Yes, it is.
Hi, could you just repeat your question? I'm sorry, I don't quite understand.
Yes. No, it's fine. I'm just asking in terms of supply chain. I'm working in a government institution. So from what I've been learning, like studying supply chain, I've seen that there's so much difference as to what we do, where we are told that there's an 80-20 rule that we have to apply when we're appointing a supplier. But here we're talking quality, we're talking a lot of things that in government you can't even find. So I've just realized that there seems to be so much difference, and I'm just wondering, could it be because our processes are so much regulated, hence much difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think there definitely are a lot of factors to consider, and within the government and also within the private sector as well. I mean, I would say that, you know, when those contracts are put in place with the supplier, or even the procurement process, there's many steps that should be happening in a procurement process and many things to consider. It does depend on the industry, and it does depend on what kind of organization it is. So I'd imagine that government is maybe in some ways different, but still there's going to be the element of cost, right? There's going to be what is the cost versus other suppliers. There's going to be the element of some sort of ethical demonstration of ethics, right, of some kind, that should be in place with any procurement process. And obviously demonstration of being able to do the job, right? Those are the due diligence processes that should be in place, whether it's government or whether it is a private sector, right? Because at the end of the day, you want to be effective and efficient with that supply chain. But Lindy, I'm happy to take it to expand on it further. I'm just going to quickly move on to this because I know we're running out of time, and I know there's a couple of other questions there as well. So let me quickly just go back to the level of adoption so that everyone has put in here. So this is interesting, and I didn't really have in my mind an expectation of what I thought would come out strongest here. But it is good to see that planning activities is coming out pretty strong. The relationships with suppliers and customers is also coming out pretty strongly as well, which is really good. So that's in the right place. Risk identification and mitigation, happy to see that, because that means that you are looking forward. It means that you're anticipating something that could be happening in the future, okay? The ethical focus is big, and then we get down to execution, use of technology for visibility, root cause and corrective action, and the environmental focus as well, okay? So I do, the root cause and corrective action one actually doesn't surprise me too much that it's so low, because typically a lot of companies measure a lot of stuff, right? But that flow through of how do we correct it is so important to try and get right. So this is a really interesting piece of information. Okay, fantastic. So that's actually all we have for today. I know it was a bit of a whirlwind and showing you kind of as much as possible in the shortest space of time. But let's see if there's any additional questions, or if Kolofelo, if you would like to maybe go through any of the additional points that you have. Kolofelo, should we continue with some questions? Is that okay?
Seems like he's dropped off.
Okay. All right, no problem. Are you happy for me to continue with some questions? And I know, I mean, I have time, so.
Yes, sure, you may, Grant.
Okay, perfect. All right, so the next one that I can see here is from Chanel. Chanel, how do you do planning for a new product company with no historical data? That's something I'm very familiar with. Thanks for asking a question that I can answer. So usually with an NPD or new product, so we have a new product development process or an innovation process, could be called different things in different companies. Typically what you would do is look at a product that is similar to that one. Okay, so either you can look at a benchmark product that is similar to that product and try and apply some of the logic to that. You can look at competitive products that you have some sort of information on. In order to launch the product, you would already have had to have some kind of view of what the size of the market is, right? So you can do that and say, okay, we anticipate we could take this portion of the market, and this is where that product would fit in that. That's a way to do it as well. And definitely look at your other SKUs or products within the organization that you think may be cannibalized, through launching that new product, and perhaps you can provide some of that volume to them as well. So there's many ways to do it. And yes, usually in the new products, the more innovative it is, the more difficult it is to get it right. But there's definitely ways and means to do it. And I think, you're not going to be completely wrong usually, but it's important to do that. And of course, the other side of it is supporting the launch of a new product with maybe sometimes a little bit of additional inventory to support any potential oversells that you may have, and ensure that those things are all in place, right? I want to know if there are any opportunities for students, as I am a final year student studying BCom logistics and hoping to get light on learnerships, internships, or VAC work to try and gain experience. Okay. I mean, I'm sure we can send you something on this, RT, where, yeah, that's obviously a great question as well. And I know that there's a lot of knowledge and a lot of willingness for many of the students coming out of supply chain, with supply chain degrees and supply chain qualifications, to really just get dug into the work, right? So yes, I can definitely send you something on that, and I'm sure we can take that offline. Okay, and then Tamita, you're welcome. Chanel again, how do you calculate or forecast potential lost sales? Okay, so lost sales would be the difference between what we get an order for versus what we can supply. Okay, so that's lost sales historically. Potential lost sales would be where we anticipate a demand in the future. So let's say we anticipate we're going to sell 100 units in the month of September, but because we don't have enough supply of raw materials, and because we cannot produce that product, we can only supply 90 of the 100. Therefore, the gap is 10. Okay, that would be the anticipation of what that difference would be there. Okay, fantastic. You're welcome, Sizwe. Okay, let's check. Any other questions? Oratilo, yes, the presentation will be sent out, Oratilo, and my details on, I think, the first or second slide.
We'll also reach
great.
out.
Thanks, Jenny.
Great. Thanks, Grant. We'll also reach out to you, Oratilo, so and see how we can give you some guidance, and anybody else. I think that was that looks like it's the end of our questions there, Grant. Thank you. That was well done doing the presenting and the keeping an eye on the chat box, and I think there were some great questions there. So thanks everybody for interacting in the new norm that we are experiencing at the moment. And just a quick thanks on behalf of SAPEX to Grant for his time today and preparing the presentation and saying yes, and for all the other support that you give to SAPEX in other areas, Grant. We're very grateful. Thanks to our young professionals for joining us on this cold day in between load shedding and all the rest and busy lives. And we will share the slides, obviously, and the presentation on YouTube. And I just want to highlight, as Jenny has done in the chat, Our next Young Professional and Student Initiative event is taking place on the 22nd of June. And this is something we're just starting. So hopefully you'll join us and just really have an informal chat with 3 amazing SAPICS mentors who are very happy to give back to the young professional community, and just consider some questions that you have, like you've done today with Grant, in particularly with your area, your career, and your and any supply chain questions you have. Grab a cup of coffee. It's very informal, and we'll see how it goes, and perhaps we'll try and do it more often. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you, Cindy, for running behind, and Gugu and the SAPICS team as always. And keep well and warm and safe. And thanks, everybody.
Thank you.